Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone, and really thank everyone for their participation in this session on the introduction to the WMO preliminary position on the WRC 23 agenda. I can't emphasise enough how important an issue this is for WMO. My name is Anthony Ray. I'm the Director of the Infrastructure Department at WMO. Infrastructure, for those of you that are unaware, we consider to be the entirety of the WIGOS, the WMO Integrated Global Observing System, the WIS, the WMO Information System, and the GDPFS, the Global Data Processing Forecasting System. And the entirety of this is it's the international framework that allows us to forecast the weather, to understand the climate, to generate weather information and warnings to keep people safe. And of course, you're all aware that WMO members provide a wide range of essential services in relation to weather, water, climate, and cryosphere right across the globe. 193 members. In particular, observation systems underpinning the services that WMO members provide, and we are all aware that observation systems are completely dependent or very dependent on access to radio frequency, whether that be radio frequency for weather radars, radio frequency to allow the transmission of data from observing sites and observing platforms such as radiosondes, or perhaps most importantly, the radio frequency that we use to observe from satellites to actually take important measurements of the atmosphere, the temperature, humidity of the atmosphere. Which, if you think about the global space observing network, is probably the most important source of observations for global numerical weather prediction, and therefore warnings of phenomena like tropical cyclones, hurricanes, and other types of severe weather. The information gathered through the observations also underpins things like the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and perhaps I'll also mention the commitment of the UN Secretary General for WMO to lead an initiative to ensure that everyone on the planet is covered by early warning systems within 5 years. This is a two-edged sword, of course. The advances in telecommunications also allow us to gather our data more easily and more cheaply, more rapidly, and allow us and our members to disseminate warnings to the people that need to receive those. So, there's pluses on that side as well, and I think this is why it's really important that we have a cooperative framework with the telecommunications community and with the ITU. I note that Resolution 673 of the ITU observes the essential nature of Earth observation data, the dependence of these observations on radio frequency, and the global benefit of these, and also resolves to continue to recognise that the use of spectrum by Earth observation applications has a considerable societal, economic value, and urges administrations to take these things into account. So, but of course, this is a negotiation that we go through, and it feels a little bit like an elephant versus a mouse. We know that the telecommunications industry has huge resources. It has a lot of people working for it, a lot of lobbyists. And we, as WMO and Met Services, are definitely the smaller player in this. I don't want to call it a contest, but in this dance that we're doing together. WMO's one voice in these negotiations, and it's really important, and that's why it's so important that you're connected today and listening to this. We also need advocacy at the national level, and we need advocacy at the regional level. WMO is putting additional resources into this. We will have a person who's dedicated to radio frequency, at least 50% of their time, starting in a couple of months, and that's the first time that WMO has had someone who's actually dedicated to this and who will be able to go around and facilitate our involvement in the various regional meetings in the lead up to WRC. But there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of heavy lifting at the national level and at the regional level. And so, yeah, I want to thank everyone very much for their willingness to participate in this and participate in this workshop today. You're in very good hands with Zoya and Chang, and I also want to thank Eric and the team for all of their work in the lead up to this workshop. So I wish you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on your time zone. And I will hand back, I guess, to you, Zoya. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Anthony. And then I will be happy to hand over, pass chair rights to the chair of ETRC, Eric Allais. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Zoya, and thank you, Anthony, for this kind word. As I already mentioned, we really appreciate the involvement of WMO. I know that you are well behind this, and also Estelle make a very good job for that. And I will begin to thank Zoya, in particular Zoya and Cheng, for the preparation of these 2 sessions. As you mentioned, Anthony, it's very important that all WMO members, and in particular meteorological agency, which are not completely aware of what's happened in this frequency world. So it's important for them to know all the issue, all the strategic approach, and it's also important that each of us can follow this different important issue for WMO. And to have contact with their national regulation agency authority, just to be sure that our position is well understood and spread around the world. So I think it's the first time we do such a session of 2-session workshop to present these different positions, WMO position on the different agenda item and the interest for WMO. And it's also important to do this presentation at that time, because Vadim will present it just after me. In the ITURA process, it's important to have a milestone at this stage, just to be sure that we will be in a good way for the next meetings, important meeting in ITU, and in particular the WRC at the end of this year. So now, and of course, I did not mention because they are friends, but I thanks all the ETRFC members who prepare the different presentation we will discuss now. So thank you again, and I will now give the floor to Vadim for the presentation of ITURA processes. Vadim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I would like to present you my report, this brief introduction of the ITUR processes. Yes, my name is Vadim Nozdrian, and I'm counselor of a study group of Radio Communication Bureau in ITU. Next slide, please. Just for those who has no any idea about ITU, so International Telecommunication Union is the first international organization which was established in 1865. As WMO, we are fed by our contributor member states. So we have quite big membership, 193 member states, plus we have so-called category of participation like sector members and academy. Sector members mainly is telecommunication industry and operators. It's important to note that ITU has split it in 3 bureaus, 3 sectors. It's ITVT, standardization, mainly dealing with, I could say, with wireline communication and regulation of numbering and international tariffs. ITUD means development, dealing with assisting of developing countries in different projects on telecommunication and assisting in the development of, I could say, high level engineers and etc. And what we are going to discuss now is ITUR, radio communication sector, dealing with allocation of spectrum on global level and standardization for radio communication system. Next slide, please. Oops. Yes, as I have mentioned already, the main objective of ITUR is effective allocations of the band up to 3000 gigahertz, as well as orbital positions on geostationary and non-geostationary orbits in order to avoid harmful interference between radio stations. The main, I could say, Bible of ITUR is radio regulation. You can see from these 4 volumes from the right sides. It's international mandatory treaty, which include basic provision of spectrum management on at the global level. This radio regulation can be updated only by World Radio Communication Conference. And so basic concepts of radio regulation, first of all, is different frequency bands are allocated for radio services. As you can imagine, there are millions of radio systems in the world, and if we treat them individually, we never can find the way for sharing of these systems. So radio engineers invented such a special principle like radio service, and all radio systems are divided on the category of radio system with the similar technical parameters. And knowing these typical technical parameters and protection criteria, we can find the way for global sharing of the different radio services. And as you can see, again, from the right side, bottom of the right side of the slide, it's a small part of allocation table, which is included in Article 5 of Radio Regulation, Volume 1, where you can just as example what that band, what is the allocation of the band 81, 86 gigahertz, and it's different radio services which are allowed you to use this frequency band. And so this volumes of radio regulations includes different technical provision which allows all radio services to coexist without harmful interference by meaning of coordination procedure, by means of limitation of different technical parameters. And what is important for example, for the bands which are used for radio for passive sensing, it's footnote 5342, which actually prohibit all emissions in specific frequency bands. Next slide, please. This slide I have prepared for you just to understand what is behind of all our activities. So actually, I defined the main users which actually which involved in spectrum use. It's defense, security agencies, of course, commercial operators of communication informatization, broadcasting, everything what is concerned radio meteorology, we include in Earth exploration and meteorological satellite service. So, but plus we have transport, interest of transport company to use different radio system, and space research for different planetary missions. And as you know, radio systems now have very I could say great use in improving of production efficiency. So each radio conference is exactly the discussion between this spectrum user, because all of them, they need more, they want to use all spectrum. They don't want to respect interest of other users, and this is why each conference actually is a conflict of interest, because besides technical parameters, technical criteria which are developed by study in ITU, we have a lot of commercial and political interest, and sometimes it's very important for especially for such I could say public services like meteorological agencies to show your voice when a decision is taken by the conference about spectrum use. Next slide, please. So structure of ITUR study groups actually is similar with the structure of WMO, but you have two commissions. We have six study groups, and they are focused, as you can see, on the, first of all, on different services. And we have study group 1, which is dealing with general issues of spectrum management, such as radio monitoring and strategies for spectrum utilization, and as well as electromagnetic fields. Study group 3 is as well as more scientific group, which is dealing with development of propagation models. And then study group 4, 5, 6, 7, they are similar because they are focused just on the technical characteristics and standards, but for different radio service. So we have four main, I could say, categorization, like satellite service, study group 4, terrestrial service, study group 5, and study group 6, broadcasting services, and study group 7. So as you can imagine, meteorological services, they are mainly all space meteorological services systems. They are in study group 7, but partially there are some studies about meteorological radars in study group 5 as well. And just for as you can see, study group, besides radio regulation, study groups produce such output like handbooks and reports and recommendation. And you can find on this slide link, and if you are interested, you can take a look. What is our output of our studies? Next slide, please. This is, I try to put this figure to to illustrate what is the spectrum allocation process, what is the normal procedure. So usually when some industry, I could say, try to find the appropriate spectrum for development of new technology, some initial data has to be presented for WRC and supported by administrations. So usually it's some set of operational data and technical data. And in case if conference decides, agrees with this proposal, WRC adopts appropriate resolution with appropriate agenda item for the next WRC. And then study groups conducts sharing study taking into account existing radio systems. So all parameters of existing radio system, trying to find the compromise and try to accommodate requirements of the new system and take, but in the same time protecting existing systems. So usually results of this study are included in CPM text. So it is so-called conference preparatory meeting report. So where all sharing feasibility scenarios to resolve the issue are presented. And then after CPM, this report is represented for administration, and administrations base their proposal for WRC about this new location for the next conference. Next slide, please. And this is actually a WRC process in more. I presented it in a more clear way, I believe. Okay, so usually a cycle of WRC process is about 4 years. Before it was sometimes 3, but now it's usually 4. So where to start? Okay, let's start from the radio regulation. So when it was updated after the previous WRC. So usually WRC adopts agenda for the next WRC. So just after WRC, we have so-called, as I have mentioned already, conference preparatory meeting, which established I could say, program of the studies in accordance with next agenda. And all this information goes to study groups, and so CPM allocate appropriate agenda to the corresponding study group, and during 3 years, these studies results in the draft CPM text. So this draft CPM text goes for conference preparatory meeting, which discuss this report, and this is output of this meeting. It's a CPM text, which actually gives, as I have mentioned already, a technical basis for administration to adopt appropriate decision and to establish appropriate national position for WRC. So WRC, based on the contribution from member states, agreed about appropriate modification of the radio regulation. So all these modifications should be included in final acts, and based on final acts, radio regulations, appropriate parts of radio regulation have to be updated. So now we are here. So study groups actually finish their job, their activity. So draft CPM text is already approved and posted on the on the web page. And soon, next slide, please. So soon we will have conference preparatory meeting here in Geneva. And as I have mentioned, based on the results of, it's not based on the result, but taking into account of results of CPM, next World Radio Communication Conference will be held in Dubai in November, December 2023. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Vadim. Quite clear regarding the process. So I did not mention, but Zoya sent an email yesterday. If you have any question or remarks or need for clarification, you have a different way. Maybe the easiest one is to raise your hand. For people who are not aware, there is on the screen you have a raise hand appear. So if you want to take the floor, feel free. And of course, you can also ask a question in the chat or question and response area. So as mentioned, we are just before this CPM2 in correspondence preparatory meeting. And so at this stage, we will discuss during this CPM meeting the approval of the report to WRC. So it's why, as I mentioned, it's an important step. So if there is no, I didn't see any request. Zoya, you confirm?
Yes, that's right. Okay, so if you have any questions, we would like to encourage you to use Q&A. And if you have any technical issues, please use chat. And you are also, as Eric already mentioned, encouraged to raise your hands and just speak up to your questions, so that if any questions, it can be answered right now after each agenda item. So we very encourage active participation from our participants. Thank you very much.
So I see no request for the floor at this stage. So my proposal is to go to the second part, I could say, of this session, just to maybe to explain quickly, because some people can ask why there is not the different agenda item in numerical order. We in fact we stick the presentation on the draft CPM report, as you can see on the screen. And in this draft CPM report, we have different chapters, 5 chapters, which are in fact take into account the different services, as explained by Vadim. So, for example, you can see in chapter 1, it's fixed mobile and broadcasting and whatever. So, and the aim is to present only at this stage the agenda item which are reflected in the WMO position paper, preliminary WMO position paper, and also, of course, the agenda item and prime interest for WMO. So if it is so, and yes, to mention, we are in fact here we inserted, I could say, in the different part. If you have a look on the WMO position paper, we have 2 annexes. One related to resolution 731, which will be dealt in the agenda item 4, chapter 5. Just you can scroll. Yeah, here it is. So this agenda item 4 will reflect the annex 1 of the preliminary WMO position paper. And regarding the annex 2, which is related to the sea surface temperature measurement, we will mention it in agenda item 1.2, and we will do it in a few minutes. just to be sure that everyone understands how the structure of these different presentation and the link with the preliminary WMO position. Okay, so there is no comment. I propose we are in advance, but it's always good. Leave us more time to for discussion. Okay. So regarding agenda item 1.2, thank you, Zoya. So this agenda item is related to potential identification for IMT, International Mobile Telecommunication. And there are different frequency bands which are looking for. Two of them, and I will only focus the presentation of the two of them, which can create potential effect or impact on WMO systems. The first one is the band 10 to 10.5 gigahertz, which we will present, and the second one is what I've just mentioned regarding the surface temperature measurement in the 6.7 gigahertz. So regarding this frequency band 10 to 10.5 gigahertz, so just to clear things are clear, the agenda item is focused on this frequency band only at this stage in region 2. Region 2, for people who are not completely aware, and it's not in ITOR we are not the same regions as in WMO. In ITOR we have 3 regions. So region 1, to simplify, is Europe and Africa countries. Region 2 is the Americas, North and South, and all the other parts of the globe, Asiatic parts, is in region 3. So this agenda item regarding this frequency band 10 to 10.5 is only for region 2. But as this band, our system can use this band for non-geostationary satellite. Of course, we can have impact even if it's only in region 2 that identification of international mobile telecommunication is approved during WRC. So at this stage, in this frequency band, the study were limited only to microcells base stations. Even if in the discussion it appears that macrocells could be deployed, it's not yet completely studied for this band. So what are the potential impact to WMO interest? First of all, in the band 10.6 to 10.7, we have an allocation to a primary allocation to ESS passive. And as it was mentioned in the presentation, Vadim presentation, this band is under the footnote 5.340, which applies in part of this 10.6, 10.7 gigahertz. And this footnote means that no emission can be done in this specific frequency band under number 5.340 footnote. So that means it's quite an important frequency band for WMO. In the 10.6, 10.7, in a global way, it's a band very useful and used for different measurements, and in particular the snow morphology and rain rate. We have also a primary allocation in the band 9.2 to 10.4 gigahertz for ESS active. And in that band, we have some specific systems such as SAR, synthetic aperture radars, which are used. And if my memory correct, this new allocation was was obtained during WRC 2015 or 2012. So that means that these frequency bands are used, and they are in particular used for climate change and fluid monitoring. Next slide, please. So regarding the WMO position at this stage, so WMO is not in favor of the IMT identification in the 10 to 10.5 gigahertz frequency band. In case this identification be made during the WRC, we will need, of course, to have appropriate regulatory provision in order to ensure the protection of 10.6 to 10.7 usage, and in particular regarding the unwanted emission from IMT system, which will operate in 10 to 10.5 gigahertz band, and also appropriate regulatory provision to protect the active operation, and in that case it will be in band 10 to 10.4 gigahertz band. So at this stage it's the preliminary WMO position. As you said, we want really to have a clear protection of in the both in band and adjacent band protection of our usage. So at this stage, the status for regarding this agenda item. So the study result indicate that unwanted TRP, or total radiated power, are necessary in order to ensure the protection of ESS passive. For the draft report of the CPM, some value were put on this draft report you have on the screen. So minus 40.4 dBW and minus 33.4 dBW per 100 megahertz. During the last 5B, which is the working party in ITU, which is responsible of this agenda item, a new study was produced, and this value was new value was proposed, which was respectively minus 43 dBW and minus 41 dBW for the protection of ESS passive. So this value will be discussed certainly during the CPM meeting in less than 1 month now. Now, regarding the protection of ESS active in band, it appears that all the study results show an exceeded value of 11.5 dBs. I hope you hear me well. See some. Okay. So that means that at this stage, the protection of ESS active is not ensured. So different mitigation techniques were proposed, such as a limitation of the power, TRP of EIRP, or requiring additional attenuation. But at this stage, I could say that people are not completely convinced of the reality of such possible attenuation, enough possible attenuation to ensure the protection of ESS active. It's why at this stage, in the draft CPM text, there is a TBD to be defined. So, of course, if this some limitation of TRP, of IRP appear, of course, that can help of the protection of the out-of-band protection of the ESS passive. But during the last 5D meeting, it appears that all the study and work done to ensure these different mitigation approaches or different study result is not very clear. We had not a lot of time to discuss in detail of these studies. So it will be a key point during CPM meeting in March. So that's it for the 10 gigahertz portion. Can I propose to have some question or clarification if needed at this stage, and we'll go just after to the 6-7 gigahertz band.
Derek, do you have a question? I believe I saw your hands raised. Any question, Derek? You can talk if you wish, yeah.
No, sorry, just I changed the device. And
Okay,
my made it automatically. Thank you.
Okay, but in any case, even if you have no question at this time, there will be always possibility to ask a question by email or whatever by the WMO Secretariat if needed. So I propose we go to the second part of this agenda item 1.2. So it's related to the sea surface temperature measurement. Regarding this frequency band, in fact, which are under study under agenda item 1.2, I used to say that it's an impact, indirect impact of this agenda item. For the main reason is that, in fact, we use this the two frequency bands mentioned here to make a sea surface temperature measurement above ocean. And at this stage in the radio regulation, there is no allocation for this usage. That means that we have no protection of that band. We have only, I said only because that footnote doesn't provide protection. We have only a footnote mentioning that it's in green in the slide. Administration should bear in mind the needs to the ESS passive and space resource passive services in their future planning of the blah 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 frequency bands. So, and we saw during the discussion that some administration refused to take into account the protection of this usage in the discussion and in the different studies. So, in fact, what's happened? There are a study which shows that based on the mobile system deployment, if these two frequency bands are identified for IMT, we will have a huge impact on this sea surface temperature measurement. But if you look in the radio regs, in fact, we have already a mobile allocation in this band. That means that airline system can be deployed. And if this band, for example, is not identified during WRC for IMT, administration will be able, due to the fact that this mobile allocation is existing, will be able to deploy airline systems. So even with airline system, we will have impact on this SST sea surface temperature measurement. So next slide, please. Just to explain the situation and the result of primary studies. As you can see on the picture on the left side, if IMT is deployed, that means that you will have an impact from 1,300 kilometers to 2,000 kilometers, depending on the satellite position, That means that in all this area, it will not be possible to have any more measurement of the sea surface temperature. So it's quite important. If you, for the airline, the impact will be less due to the different of deployment. But in any case, we will have impact in this sea surface temperature measurement. On the right side, you see the curve of the sensibility of the sea surface temperature measurement. And that means that you, as you can see in the range to 4 to 9 gigahertz frequency range, the sensitivity is as a maximum, and it's certainly the reason why the 6-7 gigahertz was chosen in the past. But I think it was done. We made some archaeological research, and it appears that this allocation was made in the. It was not WRC at this stage. It was the WARC in 1979, and of course at that time nobody think about the fact that we will have such a high density deployment of mobile system that could impact the measurement above ocean. So it's why there was not a clear allocation to ESS passive in that band at this period. But anyway, the question is there now. So what approach is proposed? First of all, as we have no protection, and as an impact can occur from mobile identification or for airline usage, we will have to do something if you don't want to lose these sea surface temperature measurement. So it is proposed to consider at the next WRC, if possible, a new ESS passive allocation in the frequency range 410 gigahertz, in order to prepare to move the different measurement from 6-7 to another other frequency band. I didn't mention here at this stage because when we established the WMO position, we were not completely aware of which kind of frequency band can respond to this request. And since last August, we identified some potential frequency band, which are the band 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz band and 8.4 to 8.5 gigahertz band. So discussions are ongoing to how we will be able to deal with this potential new allocation to ESS passive system. And there are different options, but the idea is to inform all WRC participants that we have an issue, that we need to provide a response as soon as possible, if possible during WRC 23, and to have the identification of these two frequency bands, at least at this stage, to replace in a longer term the 6-7 gigahertz measurement, and to be sure that we will not lose this important measurement of the sea surface temperature. So I hope I was clear enough, because it's an important but not so easy issue, but I'm ready to provide a clarification if needed. So Pierre, I was clear enough at this stage. So we can go to agenda item 1.3. I will give the floor to Marcus.
Thank you very much, Eric, and good morning, good day to everybody. Agenda item 1.3 deals with a primary allocation in the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz for mobile service in Region 1. Region 1, as Eric explained, is Europe and Africa, roughly. And this is, you should understand that what is called C-band is also a very important band, not only for IMT nowadays, but also for satellite services. And we, as our community, we're using the C-band for the GeoNetcast satellite data distribution of our meteorological services. And this is basically a global network with users around the world. And this is a pretty cost-effective way of providing the data to the user community. And with the extension of the mobile use and the IMT use in the which is today 3.4, 3.6, further up to 3.8, the resources for the FSS gets more kind of condensed towards the upper part of the C-band, which, as you can imagine, also gives some higher interest in the use of the bands, parts of the C-band, which are not kind of impacted by IMT use. So this could, in the long term, have some impact on the ability of providing this cost-effective mechanism to the users, because the transponders that are available are on higher demand, and this could increase the prices for leasing the transponders. But also that you, as a user, might be confronted with a situation that your receiver satellite dish might not be protected from any potential IMT development and deployment in your country, so that you will have to make some additional efforts in order to protect your satellite receiver yourself, because the administration will not provide you any kind of protection. So that's basically the background of this. The message is that the C-band use of IMT is ever increasing, and this agenda item 1.3 is one element of this. And in the long term, we hope that we can keep the impact on GeoNetcast to a minimum. But please be aware that this could be the situation that IMT is expanding, and you might see these effects for your receptions of your GeoNetcast in C-band. With this, if there are no questions, I can give this back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Marcus. Presentation. So, is there any question for clarification? I see none, so can go to agenda item 1.4. Philippe?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Can you hear me?
Fine.
Okay, good. Good morning, good day to all. So agenda item 1.4 is so-called HIPS issue, and you can see that HIPS stands for the acronym of High Altitude Platform Station, has IMT base station, which means that people that are aware of what is IMT, so that's the 4G, 5G mobile applications. There are now some possible interest of having some of the base station placed at a certain altitude, and the figure that is on this slide shows the HIPS station standing at around 20 kilometer altitude, to have a global coverage of a certain area to serve as a complement to the regular IMT networks on the ground. And of course, you would understand that having this station at a certain altitude like this means that there is a totally different interference scenario with regard to the other users, because then you have a quite wide visibility from the HIPs on the ground and several hundred of kilometers. That may include a number of systems that we are using as a meteorological community, and among of them, I have included the one that we have been considering, which is the meteorological radars that are above 2.7 gigahertz. And the picture that is on this slide is related to the meteorological radars. So of course, if we have, usually we are sharing adjacent band with IMT on the ground. So there are some, let's say, some shielding and some additional attenuation from the IMT station to the Met radar. And usually we can find some easy way of sharing or making sure that we are in compatibility. Here you would understand that there will be a total free space from any radar to the HIPs, which means that the risk of interference is much higher. So that there is something that has been studied on this one. We have also been considering the METSAT, GSO and non-GSO, operating in the band 1675, 1710. Which is adjacent to the band proposed by HIPS above 1710. So that's also another issue that we have been looking. Once again, changing the situation with regard to the compatibility with METSAT, and we have also another issue that we have been looking as a meteorological community, which is ESS, METSAT, SOS, that is missing on this slide, adjacent to the 2 gigahertz that we are using, where in this case we have in the reverse direction, in this case, which is the downlink for the HIPs that we have been addressing. So that's the scene that is set for the Agile item 1.4. Next slide, please. So on the WMO position in the first square, of course, we are what we have addressed is that we have been asked or asking that there should be no change in the interference environment for METSAT. And the best way to do it is to make sure that the direction of transmission for HIPs will be the same as the one that we have currently on the terrestrial networks, which means that if there is a limitation of the HIPs operation to the uplink direction, meaning from transmission from a mobile phone on the ground to the HIPs, then in this case the situation will not change for METSAT. If there would be a possibility of having the reverse direction, then in this case there could be a problem having some transmission from the HIPs down to the ground, and in this case it will increase drastically the possibility of interference to the METSAT that is receiving. So that has been considered. There was no specific studies. The only conclusion in the draft CPM text is that this direction should ensure the protection of MetSat. So this is something that we will need to have covered at the end. The second point deal with ESS and SOS. Here also not to change the interference environment, but in this case it is a different case. We are in our band adjacent to the HIPS. We are transmitting uplink, so the transmission is from the terrestrial station, the ground station, to the satellites. And then in this case, if in the same or in the adjacent band, the HIPS station in the sky would be receiving, then there would be a potential for interference from our station to the HIPS. This is something that we know, and that about 20 years ago we didn't, let's say, not pay attention, but we didn't really consider that there could be a problem, and then we have lost the possibility of using some station in some bands due to the same kind of interference scenario that we may interfere some of these stations. So here also we would like to make sure that the HIPS would be in this case limited to the downlink, so the transmission from the HIPS to the ground-based user equipment, so that in this case we will not have a different situation vis-a-vis our station compared to what is currently in force with terrestrial IMT network. And then the third point of interest for the WMO position is that we have to ensure the protection of meteorological radars, and then we are asking for having necessary limits, power limits, that to ensure the protection of these radars, and of course to take into account the fact that meteorological radars are volume scanning, and that the protection has to be ensured in all directions and not only on average. So that's something that was really a clear point in our position. And if we are looking to the status of the studies that were performed in 5D, with the support of 5B for MetRadar and 7B for MetSat, we have been discussing the WMO position and conditions. And currently in the draft CPM text, we can say that the concept of limiting the HIPS direction of transmission is something that is duly considered and included. And so I do not expect some difficulty to see this limitation be included. And then we have been able to develop a PFD mask in the unwanted emission domain to ensure the protection of the MetRadar, sorry, above 2.7 gigahertz, and that was based on multiple contribution that was prepared by the WMO and meteorological community through France and US in particular, and that there is now an agreement of a mask. So still some possibility to have some other views or other position from administration, but here also I suspect that, or I expect that there should not be difficulties to have this mask included in the radio regulation if HIPS were to be supported and included in the final decision of WRC 23. So at current stage, of course, this is before CPM, and everything can happen at CPM, but I'm, let's say, quite optimistic about the outcome of agenda item 1.4 as far as the meteorological interests are considered. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Philippe. This is the presentation. Different issue here to protect, to ensure protection. So, is there any question or for clarification? So, you were clear. So, Thank you for that. So we can go to the next item, which is agenda item 1.5. So this agenda item is to review the spectrum use and spectrum needs for existing services in the 470 to 960 megahertz, and only limited to region 1. So behind this agenda item, it's in fact I could say the fight between mobile system and broadcasting systems. So, but in any case, we have in some countries, and in particular in European countries, a secondary allocation to a radio location service. But this allocation is limited to wind provider radars. And this secondary allocation is in accordance with the resolution 217 here you have on the screen, which detail the different implementation of wind provider radars. And you have a particular resolve that identified, in fact, the band 470 to 494 megahertz to radio location service on a secondary basis, and in some country, and dedicated to wind provider radars. So, as you can see on a regulatory, pure regulatory point of view, we have a lot of weakness regarding this allocation. First of all, because it's a secondary allocation. So in ITU, when you're on a secondary basis, study, it's more than rare that study take into account secondary allocation. And secondly, that it is limited to some countries, that provides all the limitation of to ensure the protection of this system. However, that not means that we don't have to mention this protection, and it's what it's done in the preliminary WMO position. You can see on the box, but the formulation of this of the WMO position, it's what we use the term would appreciate the development of a solution, because we can't ask firmly for something. So, but there is another point here. It's the fact that we have to, as it is limited in some country, maybe the protection can be ensured on a national basis. So that means that if it is the case, there is no need to have a specific regulation in the radio regs, which are radio regs. It's more regarding protection on an international approach. So I think it's the only thing I want to say at this stage. For information, as it is focalized on a European country, in the European position, draft preliminary CPT position, there is a specific wording in order to ensure the protection of these wind provider radars. So that's it for the presentation. So if you have any question, clarification, I'll be happy to try to answer. See none, so suppose we go to the next agenda item, 1.6. So the agenda 1.6 is related to sorry, to try to define regulation provision to facilitate the communication for suborbital vehicles. So first of all, this agenda item will not permit to change Article 5. Article 5 in the radio regs is the different frequency allocation, service allocation in all different frequency bands. But under this agenda item, some other regulatory changes can be made, and we have to ensure that this modification will not impact our usage, and in particular the METSAT and Earth exploration satellite services we have. So we have also to keep in mind that this usage of suborbital can have an interest for WMO in the future, as today it's already the case for the secondary surveillance radars deployed in civil aviation. So we have to have this in mind. And for people who are interested, there is a report, ITOR report 2477, which describes all the different suborbital flights and suborbital vehicles, and what are the interest of such system. So based on all these elements, the WMO position support the development of regulatory provision to facilitate this suborbital vehicle operation. But this regulation will also ensure not having any negative impact on the current and future METSAT and ESS operation. And in this position, as the CPM draft CPM text was well advanced when we had the last ETRFC meeting, we mentioned that in the draft CPM text, for each agenda item, you have in fact different methods to present in which way the answer to any specific agenda item can be provided. So it appears that for this specific agenda item, you have different methods, and sometimes in each method you have different approaches. And it appears that regarding this agenda item, the method B, approach A, can satisfy WMO objectives. And I put here just below in green what is method B, approach A. So first of all, it's to provide the definition of suborbital flight and suborbital vehicles, just to fix things, as nothing is mentioned in the radio regs at this stage. To have a list of the minimum requirement of frequency band needed for such usage, and to have also to provide provision to avoid any potential impact on other system or other services. And if an option could be also to describe these different operation in space under a specific article of the radio regs, which is article 4.4. But in fact, this article clearly mentioned that you can use a specific frequency band for a specific usage, but you have to ensure that you will not create any interference to existing system, but also will not, you can't ask for protection. So it's also it's a very limited usage without any protection. So that's it for this agenda item. If you have any request or remark, feel free. None. Okay, so we can go to the next agenda item, which is 1.10. So 1.10 is an agenda item related to try to study potential spectrum for what we call non-safety application of the aeronautical mobile service in two specific frequency band, 15.4, 15.7, and 22.21 gigahertz. The aim of this agenda item is to try to, the idea is to have some more wideband line of sign data link in air-to-air, but also ground-to-air or air-to-ground direction between different aeronautical system, helicopter, flights, and whatever, in order to ensure a more information like pollution monitoring or fire surveillance. So it's why you have in the picture the different scenario you can use with this different allocation. Regarding the impact or the interest of W members, first of all, we have a primary allocation in the ESS passive in the adjacent band to the band 22.21 gigahertz band, which is already a share with FS and so fixed service and mobile service. But the mobile service is today limited. We can't use aeronautical system under the mobile service. So it's mobile service except aeronautical mobile service. So it's why this new proposal can really impact over system. But once again, the purpose of this agenda item, it's of course to try to extend the usage to aeronautical system, mobile system, but limit this usage for aeronautical, what we call all route system. That means that this kind of frequency band will not be able to be used for civil aviation control flights. So it's only for specific usage for specific application. So regarding the band 22.21 to 22.5 gigahertz, it can be impacted by this system. It's used for the different measure of atmospheric water vapor. And regarding the other band that could be impacted, just the adjacent band of the 15.4 to 15.7 gigahertz band, which is the band 1535 to 15.4 gigahertz. At this stage, we have no usage of that band, so difficult to ask any protection for something we are not using. So next slide, please. So it's why we in the WMO position we have only reference to the 22 to protection of 22.21 to 22.5 gigahertz, and we mentioned here an appropriate unwanted emission limit, which is minus 23 dBW per 100 megahertz, that will ensure the protection of ESS passive in the adjacent band. So that is the preliminary WMO position at this stage. Now, regarding the status of the study and regulatory solution for this agenda item, so as I already mentioned, and it's reflected in the WMO position, we have the study, the result of the study, and the level of unwanted emission power density limit, which is mentioned here. We have to. What we have to mention is there is only one passive remote sensor that was studied, which is reflected in the recommendation, ITUR recommendations, RS 1861-1, which contain only one sensor. At this stage in the draft CPM text, and regarding the potential new footnote could be added in the Article 5. There is only the reference of a footnote without any mentioning of whatever we can put in this footnote. But we will see during the discussion in CPM if we fill this footnote, or even if it is not doing the CPM, we'll be doing, and for sure, doing WRC, if this new allocation is approved at WRC. So that's it for this agenda item. So if you have any question for clarification, remarks. I see none, so fine. So we can go to 112. I will give the floor to Philippe again.
Yes.
Philippe, okay.
Thank you. So, agenda item 112. On this one, this item we are, let's say, on the two side. We have some interest, and we have also some system that we have to take care of. But first, what we can consider here is that it's a possible new secondary allocation to ESS active for radar sounders around 45. So around 45, that really the target is to have a usage between 40 and 50 megahertz. If we have a look to the radio regulation and what we are currently using, we have two main issues of interest. The first one is WPR, wind profiler radars, that are currently identified in the radio regulation under a specific footnote 5162A for the band 4668. That's quite important aspect, and we have a number of WPR worldwide in this range. But at the exception of two, one in France and one in the UK, most of these WPR operate above 50 megahertz. So we have to address two things in band for these two WPR. Although La Maison, I'm not sure that it's still in operation. And then for the other, we have to verify that out of band there would be a compatibility. The second issue for which we have interest are oceanographic radars, which are identified in two specific subbands, which are there, 41, 42, and 42.5, 44. And here we have a specific identification in a footnote 5161A in the radio regulation. So that's something that we have to look at from the, let's say, from the interference and protection perspective, but also we are looking also to the ESS active allocation, which is also an important that may be an important tool for the climate studies, climate change analysis, and that's why I put the picture on the right of the slide. You can see that with yellow circle, it are the main targets, not the only one, but at least the main things that are really focusing under focus for these systems are to study the ice sheets, so Greenland, Antarctica, or let's say the two poles, for a parameter that could be used in climate evolution, and then also some fossil aquifers in desertic environment, and that's why you can have for example one specific target which is on the let's say Sahara and North Africa, Sahara and Arabic Peninsula. So these are two things for which we have also some interest in seeing the ESS active here. One thing that we may say is that currently it is one system, one satellite, so it's not something that may be that will most probably see a major development. So it's one system for that is currently driven by NASA, and maybe another one that at least that I know is maybe another one from European Space Agency, ESA. But that's something that will not see a massive deployment of satellite, as we can see in other bands, which are used for telecommunication, for example. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the WMO position is quite clear, is that we support this new secondary allocation with the appropriate protection being provided to wind profiler radars. That's the main things. We may also have to address the oceanographic radar in-band, but for wind profiler, we may have to think about something specific. About the status of it. So it has been studied in Working Party 7C, supported by 5B. And on this agenda item, for sure, the issue is not as advanced as some others. We are still in discussion on the interference scenario, the parameters, the relevance of using peak or average ESS active power, depending on the potential victim system, like for example, for wind profiler, we may be using a certain type of analysis where for mobile, we may be able to use a mean power, average power, but this is still in discussion. So you understand that the studies that have been done so far are not completed yet. We had a specific correspondence activity within 7C, and we had a meeting at the beginning of this month, which at the end has allowed to show some level of progress, and in particular to be able to agree on some of the scenario and parameters, but also raising still a number of questions. So that's the status of it. It is really not complete yet. Currently, the sharing studies that we have been addressing is showing that there are and there will be some occurrence of interference exceeding the protection criteria, and this is valid for almost all victim services that have been studied. So I've been talking about oceanographic radar, wind profilers, mobile, fixed, and others. This is the situation. Something that has to be understood is that if we are trying to ensure the protection of all services 100% of the time, and on this one, I'm more looking at the mobile service, for example, then in this case, we know that the power limits or the PFD limits that would have to be applied to ESS active will not allow to operate any satellite in this band. So that's why one of the key point that is really still to be addressed is to understand what would be the impact on the radio services of a certain amount of interference or exceeding of the protection criteria. We are currently showing that these, since we are talking about, let's say, 1 or 2 maximum satellite, the interference events would be limited in percentage of time, limited in length, and this is something that is still to be discussed and addressed. I can suspect that it might lead to difficult discussion at ITOR level, and at first probably at CPM there would be some additional discussion, technical analysis probably, but also at WRC we have some, let's say, some bad experience at WRC 19 on other issues that we may suspect that if we have the same level of discussion, it may end up with unfortunately a possible no change, which will not allow for an identification of this band for ESS active. If we are optimistic, let's say that we may have the opportunity to have a possible secondary allocation, but most probably with a number of additional conditions. So it will not be only an allocation, but these will be, although it is secondary, this will be associated with maximum PFD levels. That's one thing. Limiting the percentage of transmission time over days and orbit, for example, limiting the number of system or satellite, and so on, and maybe some other that may be addressed at relevant time. So yeah, on this one, let's say it's somehow difficult. We are still looking at some approach, and maybe also at some time we may have to address some let's say specific coordination between communities. If we are, for example, for the wind profilers, we may think about something that we may address one satellite versus one specific wind profiler. That's something that could be addressed between the relevant community rather than to have something in the radio regulation. So this is still a let's say, wide open agenda item, and most probably we will see a bit more where we stand for the situation after CPM. So that may also help us to address the different points at the next ETRFC, so that we will be able to have a final WMO position that will consider the up-to-date studies that will be presented at the end of March. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe, for this presentation. Some questions. Any clarification needed or question? See none, so we can go through the next agenda item, which is Bruno.
Yes, good morning, colleagues, and good day to all. And thanks for providing the opportunity to present these elements related to agenda item 113, which is simple from a WMO point of view. Agenda item 113 deals with the upgrade of the space research service in the band 14.8, 15.35 gigahertz. So this frequency band is currently allocated to the space research service, but on a secondary basis. And the scope here is to upgrade the allocations to a primary status in order to provide more strong regulatory status and more visibility for the long-term use of this band for space research mission, including also for some potential lunar missions. So it's something which is quite interesting for space agencies. But regarding the impact on potential WMO interest, we need to take into account that the adjacent band 15.35 to 15.4 gigahertz is one of these bands covered by the footnote 5340, where no emissions are allowed in these bands, no intentional emissions. And these bands is allocated to ESS passive and also to radio astronomy. We also need to take into account that the band 15.2, 15.35, so which is co-channel with a band where SRS wants to be upgraded, is also allocated on a secondary basis this time to the ESS passive as per the footnote 5.339. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that indeed this agenda item is simple for WMO, and the position is the following: that WMO is not opposed to the upgrading of this SRS secondary allocation to primary status. And the reason for that is that, in fact, the band 15.35 to 15.4 gigahertz, it's used for radio astronomy, but there is no current use to ESS passive, and that was confirmed by the recommendation ITUR RS 1861, where there is no characteristic there. And additional investigation have been performed, and we try to approach all the potential use of the band for ESS passive, and it was confirmed that there is no current or planned use of these bands by ESS passive. So from a meteorological point of view, no issue is to be expected from this agenda item, and on this basis, there is no real problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Yes, we are in the same case at agenda item 1.10 regarding this band 15.45 to 15.4 gigahertz. Okay, so is there any request for the floor? See none, so we can go to the next agenda item 114. So Marcus.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, 1.14. Here we have one of very few rare cases where we have the chance to have some additional spectrum for ESS passive, so passive microwave sensing. Very unique resources that we are exploiting, and they usually require some significant level of protection. That's why it's not so easy to get such new allocations at all. Here, the background is that scientists doing the numerical weather prediction and doing observation of the elements of the atmosphere from space, they developed new measurement requirements for ice clouds. They realized that this is underrepresented in the measurements that are performed today by passive microwave sensors. And the next generation of sensors are currently under development, and one of which is measuring ice clouds with several channels, one of which would be in the range 231 gigahertz to 252 gigahertz. So, and that's how the agenda item came about. This was the background, the requirement for measuring in this area, and then it went as a proposal into WRC 19 and materialized in this agenda item 1.14. So the studies have shown that there, as you see in the last indent, that 2 times 3 gigahertz would be required to perform those measurements. And this agenda item looks into this spectrum area and see whether this can be accomplished there and what needs to be done in order to ensure that there's no impact on other services. For this, all the compatibility assessments were performed in the ITU. And on the next slide, please, there you see how the solution could look like. So and that all these arrows that you see, I would like to show you how it corresponds to the WMO position. So the yellow boxes, these are the 2 new allocations that are proposed. And the compatibility studies have shown that there would be, as these are conical scanners, they are pretty sensitive to interference. They would not work well together with the fixed and mobile allocations that you see in the middle of the box, in the middle of the table at 239.2 to 241 gigahertz. So the solution would be we take those fixed and mobile allocations out there and compensate with another fixed and mobile allocation. That's what you see, 235 to 238 gigahertz. So when you make the little mathematical exercise, so you're taking 1.8 gigahertz away and give as a compensation 3 gigahertz of new spectrum for the fixed and mobile. And on top, having it contiguous with other fixed and mobile allocations in order to kind of avoid potential interference into the new passive sensing allocations, but at the same time giving some even better spectrum to the fixed and mobile service. So, but this is still not good enough to allow for these new allocations for the ESS passive. in this 235, 238 gigahertz, you see there's already a ESS passive allocation. And what the studies have also shown that ESS passive sensors using limb sounding, they would be compatible with fixed and mobile, contrary to conical scanning instruments. So the solution would be that we propose to limit the use of the 235, 238 for ESS passive to limb sounding instruments, and then they would be fully compatible with the new fixed and mobile allocation. So this would these three elements would be then a kind of a rearrangement and new allocation to ESS passive and fixed and mobile in order to, in the long term, ensure that they all can live happily next to each other. And in the end, it would be a win-win situation for everybody. Fixed and mobile would have some better usable spectrum because it's contiguous, it's even more spectrum, it's not potentially impacted by any ESS passive allocations, and ESS passive allocations for ice cloud measurements would have its new allocations. So currently it looks like globally this is an acceptable picture and concept. And let's see whether we can succeed with this. And with this, then we would have a nice portfolio of allocations for ice cloud measurements. So I think that should explain agenda item 1.14. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Marcus. This clear explanation. Yeah. It's quite a complicated agenda item, but as you mentioned, it's really a win-win proposal and with compromise made by our community. So I hope that by experience, we know even when things are a win-win approach, we always can have surprised during discussion. Okay.
As you say, Eric.
Okay, I saw Philippe ask for the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, as you say, I love this nature of win-win situation with 114. Unfortunately, there are at least one or two administrations that have a different approach, that they are trying to say that since we are moving fixed and mobile, it is an undue constraint to the fixed and mobile, without considering the fact that they will get more spectrum compared to the current situation. So I know that some administration are, or administration singular, one administration is looking at the fact that it may not be covered, strictly speaking, by the agenda item. This is such a poor argument that we have really to fight at all level, knowing that there are plenty of administrations nowadays in all regions that are fully supporting this approach and this win-win solution. So yes, we have really to not consider that it's done, but just to make sure that we are all together making sure that this will be supported by our radio administration. As I said, a number of them are already in this path. We may have once again, let's be optimistic. We may have a good surprise during CPM, although I'm not sure that that it will happen. But with a good surprise, we may have a wide support at the CPM directly to this single solution. Let's see, but yeah, we have to maintain the action to our radio administration to make sure that this will happen. Thank
you. Yes, thank you, Philippe. Yeah, it's important to always keep the pressure, not saying that okay, it's done, and so we know. Okay, so any other comments, remarks, this issue? Sounds clear. Okay, so we can go to the next agenda item, 115. So for Bruno,
Yes, thank you, Eric. Yes, now we are entering into the WRC topics dealing with satellite services. And the first one is agenda item 115, which tries to provide harmonized conditions for the operation of Earth stations on board aircraft and vessel, which would communicate with GSO space station in the fixed satellite service in the band 1275, 1325. So the whole idea around these agenda items dealing with what we call ESIM, Earth stations in motion, is to try to improve the connectivity, for example, when you are in flight, in ships, in vessels. So that's quite this has quite a momentum currently in the radio communication world, and you will see there are a couple of agenda items dealing with that. So from WMO perspective, the main element is to ensure the protection of the adjacent band 13.25, 13.75 gigahertz, where there is a primary allocation to the ESS active. And this allocation is quite extensively used by active instruments, altimeters, scatterometers, and also precipitation radars, which all provide some quite helpful information regarding sea level rise, monitoring, measurement of wind direction, and other elements related to ocean surface and also Earth surface. So that's quite an important band for us. And we need to try to ensure that this band will be protected. If you go to the next slide, you will see that here, in fact, we are quite well covered under this agenda item. So the position from WMO is clear in favor of the support of the protection of ESS active. And also here, we are in a good position since the studies which have been performed so far at the ITU conclude that there is no real risk of interference from Earth stations on board aircraft and vessel into the ESS active. So what has been done, we checked and we ensured that the technical and operational characteristics of ESS active are well taken into account, and they are well documented in the relevant ITU recommendation RS 2105. And there, on the basis of these characteristics, the studies shown that there is no real impact to be expected on ESS active from FSS Earth stations on board aircraft and vessels. So we are safe, and hopefully there will be no bad surprise for this agenda item, and we can consider that we are well covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, for the presentation. Oh, sometimes we have some agenda item, but we can say we are happy with that. No risk. Always good. Any comment? None. So we can go to the next agenda item, 116. Bruno, it's always your turn.
Yes, agenda item 116. This one is more complicated and not yet fully addressed. Again, an agenda item dealing with Earth stations in motion, this time associated with a non-GSO FSS satellite network in a range of frequency bands, what is called normally the Ka bands, between 17.7 up to 30 gigahertz. You can see that in the list of bands, some are mentioned as our space to Earth. So that's where the downlink for the satellite transmits to the Earth station, and some are referred to Earth to space with the Earth station transmitting into the satellite. And obviously that will lead to different sharing scenarios. I will go in details a little bit later. So from the WMO perspective, we have in fact three main use to be looked at and to be protected. The first one is the fact that the first band under consideration, 17.7, 18.6, overlaps with the METSAT allocation for use by GSO systems under error number 5.519 in the frequency bands 18.3 GHz for the ITU region 2, so the Americas, and in the bands 18.1, 18.4 for the two other ITU regions. Then the second topic for interest here is the fact that the band 18.6, 18.8 GHz is used by ESS passive sensors. So you can see that this band is not strictly part of those which are covered by this agenda item, but this adjacent bands. In fact, we managed to keep the gap 18.6, 18.8 as a gap, but we will have to look at adjacent band studies. And the major parameters which are obtained from the passive observation in these bands includes rain states, sea states, and sea ice morphology. So it's quite an interesting bands for ESS passive observations, and we need to take care of that. Third point, which is perhaps less critical, is the fact that the band 28.5 30 GHz is allocated on a secondary basis to ESS in the Earth to space direction for transmission of data. But because of its secondary status, it's not really used, and ensuring protection will be difficult there. So it's a bit of a secondary aspect for us. Before looking at the next slide, one thing to keep in mind is, in fact, there are two different issues. When we look at the frequency bands which are allocated in the Earth to space direction, obviously here we will look at transmission from ESIM. So these bands are quite important, but when we look at the band space to Earth, we can argue that since it's the ESIM will only receive, there might be not a big impact. But in fact, we need to keep in mind that by allowing ESIM, for example, on ship or flights, we will change how the FSS downlink will be deployed. And we can have some examples, some increased FSS activities over oceans. And we will see that this has an impact. So that's why, although these bands are space to Earth, where the ESIMs are receiving and not transmitting, it's quite important to take them into account in the studies. So let's go to the next slide to see what is the WMO position. So quite a long one, where we, in fact, try to address the two main topics. First, the ESS active in passive, sorry, in the 18.6, 18.8 gigahertz band. So we are not opposed as WMO to the use of the bands by non-GSO FSS ESIMs, provided that proper protection is given to the ESS passive. So we are mentioning current PFD limits of minus 126.4 dB watt per square meter in 200 megahertz. So that's the result of studies which were performed last year, and we will see that situation has a bit evolved here. But that's more or less where work still needs to be performed to define the proper limit. Concerning the METSAT service between 18 and 18.4 gigahertz, in fact, here there has been some consideration, but no real studies. And at the time where we wrote the WMO preliminary positions, we were still wondering whether additional provisions would be required to ensure that the deployment of ESIM will protect the METSAT allocation. If you go to the next slide, then we will, I will try to summarize a bit what the studies showed and where we are and how we can try to finalize the topics. So for the METSAT, in fact, here, since we are looking of FSS downlinks, it's clear that deployment of ESIM will change the pictures over ocean, but it will not really change the potential of interference above land. And in fact, since METSAT earth stations are deployed over land, it is expected that change in the FSS downlinks will not impact METSAT earth stations compared to more traditional fixed earth stations. So in that regard, there is currently no regulatory provisions which are proposed with respect to the protection of METSAT service. So this issue is properly addressed, I guess. When it comes to ESS passive in 18.6, 18.8, here we are still working on that. Clearly, the change in the how the earth stations will be deployed change the interference environment, and in particular, one aspect we are looking at is the impact of the reflections of FSS downlink operations over large bodies of water. So that's a kind of geometrical effect when signal from FSS will reflect over the ocean, and then it can be seen, the kind of incidence signal will be seen by the ESS passive sensors on board satellite, and then that will result to interference. So we are currently addressing what would be the good provision and good unwanted emission limits to address this. So in 2022, there were some studies which showed that this value of -126.4 dBW per square meter in 200 megahertz might be suitable. We are currently working on refining those limits, perhaps making it less restrictive. And in fact, we will see the next agenda item look at the same band. So we are also trying to see whether we can find a single set of limit which will cover the two agenda items. The third point, which is of secondary importance for us, which is the ESS in 28.530 gigahertz. Here we are of the view that because it's a secondary allocations, we don't really we are not really entitled to propose any regulatory provision. So that's an issue which has been put a bit aside. So not a simple agenda item, still a bit of work to be done, but hopefully we will find a suitable solution at CPM and then at WRC. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. It's so easy agenda item. So thanks to being so clear. Any comment or need for clarification? Seeing none, so can go to agenda item 117.
Indeed.
It's your turn, yeah. You mentioned
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, you will have the feeling that what I will explain, you already heard it, because it's quite similar, in fact, because it looks at the same frequency bands. But here it's not for ASIM, but intersatellite links. So because the band is already allocated to FSS, there are some views to use these bands no longer, or in addition to the normal FSS transmissions between satellite and Earth stations, also to look at the use of these bands for transmission between two satellites, which can be GSO and non-GSO. So the same bands are targeted under this agenda item, which means that for WMO members, the relevance of these agenda items is the same, at least for the three first points: the METSAT allocation in the 18 gigahertz range, the ESS passive allocation in 18.6, 18.8, and also the secondary allocation to ESS Earth to space in the 28.5, 30 gigahertz. And then on top of that, there are two additional elements. The first one is that, in fact, these satellite-to-satellite links, why are they envisaged? And in particular, to help supporting the download of data provided by various types of missions, and in particular, science and Earth observation missions. So in fact, this agenda item can be also interesting for meteorological satellite agencies, for Earth observation agencies, as a kind of support to provide additional connectivity and to a little bit offload the traffic, which is normally covered through downlinking of information from satellite to Earth stations. And in fact, for the 17.7, 18.6, and 18.8, 19.3 gigahertz, the idea is in a bit of extension of the concept I described previously for the ESIM, but here the Earth stations will not be, the user stations will not be on an aircraft or on a vessel or on train or whatever, but it will be indeed a satellite. So where we expect that in this band, which are space to Earth for the fixed satellite service, so downlink, the idea is that it will be used for transmission from higher orbit service providers, which can be either GSO or non-GSO, to lower orbit non-GSO user satellite. So the geometry will be a bit similar to what we had under agenda item 116, where the downlink of the FSS might create some interference to ESS passive in the 18.6, 18.8. So kind of similar agenda item. So if you go to the next slide, the WMO positions is also quite positive, and with the support of the development of appropriate provision for satellite to satellite operations, because we understand that we can gain from this potential opportunity. But then we also need to ensure that regulatory provision will be implemented to support the protection of METSATs and also to ESS passive. And in particular, when it comes to protection of ESS passive in the band 18.6, 18.8, we would like to have some appropriate limit out of band power flux density limit at the Earth surface. And when we drafted the preliminary positions last year, the current value, or the value which was at that time under consideration, was minus 126.4, so the same value. And we will see in the next slide that where we can go. Next slide, please. That in fact, situation is evolving a bit. So for the METSAT, it's exactly the same situation as for the previous agenda item. We believe that the deployment of satellite to satellite transmissions will not change the interference scenarios over land. So there is no real risk for increase of interference to METSAT. So in that regard, there is no regulatory provisions which are proposed for that. For the ESS passive here, again, because of satellite to satellite downlink transmissions, we can have increase of interference due to reflection over a large body of water. So we need to find proper provision to cover that. And the latest studies which have been performed in the recent months show that we may be okay with some PFD limits in the range of minus 118 to minus 110 dBW per square meter in 200 megahertz. It depends more or less on the type of FSS deployment, the type of orbit, and in particular the altitude of the FSS downlink satellite transmitting. So that's, we are not yet concluding on that, but we are getting close. And we hope that with these values, we can perhaps also solve the other agenda item 116. So that's where we stand. And for the protection of ESS Earth to space in around 30 gigahertz, again, here that there is no real possibility to have proper provision, but it's not currently really used, so it's not really an issue. So these two agenda item 116, 117, quite similar, go together, and hopefully we will be able to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. The link between the both is very important here to be understood. And as you say, if we can resolve one of them, we will resolve the other one. So it's good for us. So, any comments? Still none, so we can go to the next agenda item, 118, and Philippe.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Here again. So 118 is addressing a possible new allocation to the mobile satellite service in some bands, and here I have not put even the detail of the various region, because it's not worldwide allocation, at least for some of them. That will be for MSS for narrowband systems and Internet of Things and few very narrowband and low data rate systems. From our perspective, and you can see that for the first band, we have we still have the issue of the protection of meteorological satellite, GSO and non-GSO, in the band 1695-1710, but also in the adjacent band below 1695. We also have the issue of the ESS METSAT and SOS in the band 2025-2110, that is adjacent to one of the band that is also targeted there. What is critical under this agenda item is that for the band that are currently considered here, there was no mention of whether this MSS would be uplink or downlink, which then create also some difficulty with regard to the potential impact when, for example, in the first band we have a usage that is downlink only from METSAT to a station. So that was one of the critical issue, and another one is that here we are talking about MSS, narrowband, small systems that could be also down to CubeSat, or and with a potential for high number of MSS systems, satellite, ubiquitous earth stations, so that there would be a mass deployment without having a knowledge of where they are. And so presenting a risk of interference and over-constraining coordination process if we have to address in coordination hundreds of systems, of different systems. Next slide, please. So the WMO position on this one is that the WMO does not support any regulation modification under this item, since there has not been completed ITOR studies. So this position is raising, as I said just before, the current and future METSAT operation in the 1695-1710 and adjacent band, but also the SSM METSAT and SOS in the adjacent 2025-2110. About the status of ITOR studies that were performed in Working Party 4C, supported by 7B, there has been really some difficult discussion on addressing the narrowband MSS parameters. And so far, no agreement has been reached. Probably also a bit of tactic from some administration that have just been trying to block the item, but this has really created some difficulty, because in this case, without an agreement on MSS parameters, well, it was really impossible to complete the sharing and compatibility studies, which are at this stage really in a bad shape, and we cannot expect that there would be any progress from now to the conference anyhow. So it's highly probable that this item will end up with a no change. Which I think, well, it's a good point to us, because we were fearing about the potential impact on our application of interest. But this doesn't mean that the issue will be closed. There is some discussion, and at least in Europe, that's the situation. There would be a potential new agenda item for WRC 27 that we try to, from the start and from the description of the item, that we try to avoid some of the problem that we entered under this agenda item 118. What we are trying to achieve on this one is that we are trying to make sure that at least the 1695-1710 megahertz band will not be considered anymore, highlighting the importance of MedSat in this band. In Europe, we have succeeded. So for sure, there would be a need also to have some discussion in other regions and countries to make sure that this will also will not happen. But so that's the situation for agenda item 118. Most probably no change. And then we just have to work on making sure that the follow-up agenda item for WRC 27 will not be of interest to us, because then because the band will not cover the bands that are of interest for WMO.
Thank you, Philippe, the presentation. And I think it's important to be aware, as you mentioned, of this potential new agenda item for WRC 27. So we remember during WRC 19, it was very at the end of the WRC that such band appears on the table. So we have to be careful until the end. Okay, so any comment, remarks regarding this agenda item?
Is a hand raised by Maxime. Maxime, please go ahead. You have the floor.
We can't hear you, Maxime.
Maxime, you're allowed just to unmute yourself, and please go ahead. You are still muted. Maxime, can you hear us? Okay, there seems to be some issue. Sorry.
So maybe Maxime, if you can hear us, can you put your question or remark on the chat? You appear always muted. Okay, so may I propose that we go to the next agenda item, and if Maxime can join us later, we will be able, of course, to answer it. So next agenda item is agenda item 7. So Marcus.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, this agenda item 7 is a pretty complicated matter. It deals with, it's a kind of a standing agenda item which comes every conference, dealing with the coordination and notification procedures for frequency assignment for satellite networks. This is something which is called a mini conference in the conference, because it's so complicated, and these procedures are so complex that they are only understood by those who are really deeply working with them, either filing systems as operators or those administrations who have many operators filing through their administrations. For others, it would be pretty complicated to try to dive into it. So probably 99.9% of all of us here at this workshop will not have too much of insight into how this works. So these topics, they are categorized in 3 categories. Some items are dealing with non-geostationary satellite systems. Others are dealing with planned bands. These are frequency bands that are pre-planned so that everybody or every administration gets its fair share. And then there's a topic D, which has already found some consensus in the work of the ITU. Please note that in the position paper, there is still topic L mentioned dealing with TT&C for in-orbit services for non-geostationary systems, which could have had some effect on WMO members. This is no longer existing. So jumping to the position before I give you a better overview on the items. So WMO does not support any changes that could negatively affect METSAT and ESS systems. That's a very general statement, but that is as far as WMO can go in order to ensure that it is understood that METSAT and ESS systems should not be negatively impaired by this. Next slide, please. So to alleviate some of what I have just said in terms of concerns, most of the items has nothing to do with us. So basically can't, or at this conference, it melts down to maybe one item which slightly potentially touches our interests. This is topic A, which deals with the tolerances of certain orbit characteristics for non-geostationary space stations, but also only indirect, because the FSS, fixed satellite service, BSS, and MSS, broadcasting satellite service and mobile satellite services, it's not directly what we are using, but this could have a spillover effect in the long run when these limitations would then be kind of translated also to bands and services that we are using. So the interest under A is that you know, there should be some limitations on how filings are done. The commercial operators, of course, try to maximize the freedom of filing and using their resources that they have coordinated in a most effective way, and also having a benefit over others. So this could sometimes impact on the way we are potentially being able to use our resources. So that's why A might have some slight potential issue that we should take care of. But all the others, as you see, they are dealing with the planned bands, which we are not using, and also which are dealing with commercial frequency bands under the FSS or BSS. So this is luckily not our concern. Otherwise, we would have to dive into the mechanics of these coordination notification procedures, which we luckily can stand on the sideline and observe that nothing is going in the wrong direction. With having said that, let's keep it there, and let's be happy that we are not involved so much into this kind of internal conference of the conference dealing with these coordination and notification procedures. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you to follow this agenda item 7, because I'm for sure in the 99.9% who I don't understand very many things on that. So you are our man, this agenda item. So,
oh no, Eric, I try to do my best. I can survive with my filings, but luckily I only have to scratch the surface of this.
Yeah. Okay, so any remarks, question, clarification? I see none. So we didn't recover Maxime, not anymore. So anyway, so it was the last agenda item regarding chapter 4, the satellite issue. So now we are We are entering in the last chapter, general issues, and the first agenda item on this, it's agenda item 4. So just to provide you some background, in fact, we, during WRC 19, resolution 731 was modified, and it has we were some anxious with this resolution 731 due to the fact that if you look the square in green, there are two invites in this ITOR. The first one is to continue the study to determine the sharing condition and possible between active and passive services in a band above 71 gigahertz. And if you look in this different frequency band, some of them are covered by footnote 5.340, in which we already talked about it previously, in which no emission are allowed. So it's one fact, and the second one is to invites to conduct study to determine the specific condition to be applied to the land and fixed services application to ensure the protection of ESS passive in a free frequency band mentioned, and it's a discussion which arose during WRC 19, and in particular the agenda item 115. So the during discussion on the WRC 19 and on the study period, it was not possible to identify any condition that will ensure the protection of passive services. So it's why this invites to was written here. So at the beginning, we tried to see how we can put this issue on the table of WRC 23, and the approach was to use this agenda item 4, which make reference to a specific resolution 95, which was also revised in WRC during WRC 19, which allowed to review the different resolution and recommendation taken by previous conference, and in a view to revise this, to revise, replace, or delete such resolution. So it's why this the aspect of this resolution 731 was put initially in a dedicated annex of the preliminary WMO position, Annex 1, and now we try to put it under agenda item 4. That will be certainly one of the modifications we will deal with at during the next ETRC meeting in April. So next slide, please. So regarding the at this stage the position, just to mention that we have concern as I explained, in particular regarding the band above 71 gigahertz, which are essential for meteorological community, and it's why the WMO position is supposed to deals with this resolution 731, which revision of this resolution under agenda item 4, and in particular to ensure the protection of the band which are covered by footnote 5.340. So that's it for agenda item 4. Any comment, question? Let's see. I suppose we go to the next agenda item, 9.1 is with us. So Kirsty, are you with us?
Thank you, Eric.
Okay.
So Yes, hello everybody. So agenda item 9.1 topic A is looking at space weather with a focus on appropriate recognition and protection in the radio regulations for space weather sensors without placing additional constraints on incumbent services. And if the Secretariat can click forward a bit to get the other bullets up. So within this, there's 3 tasks. The first is to determine an appropriate radio communication service for space weather sensors. Also looking to develop potential solutions to describe space weather sensors and their usage in the radio regulations, and conducting sharing studies with incumbent services. And as a bit of background to this one, as you may be able to guess from the phrasing of this agenda item, at present, there's no recognition or identification of space weather within the radio regulations. There are space weather sensors being operated by WMO members and other operators within our countries. These tend to operate under other services at the moment, but it means they don't have specific protection or wouldn't need to be considered in terms of future agenda items for new services. Although it's worth noting, we're not aware of significant issues with these services receiving interference. This really is about looking to the future to make sure that these sensors receive protection in years to come. Work has been ongoing on this since WRC 15. This approach here was agreed at WRC 19. So Secretariat, can I get the next slide, please? So the WMO position on this is supporting the definition that has been proposed by the relevant ITU working party, which is shown on the right-hand side here. So defining space weather. It's worth noting that this is the definition as was agreed in the autumn. It may be changed at the CPM meeting next month. And our view is, you know, that this definition is all right. It could probably be better, but I think having a good definition is better than having no definition. So we're taking quite a pragmatic approach and supportive of there being a definition. And in addition to defining what space weather is, there's also a proposed definition for space weather sensors. And the WMO supports including these through modification of the radio regulations in Articles 1 and Articles 4. So Article 1 would add a definition of space weather to the sort of introductory section of the radio regulations where different services are described. And Article 4 would create the allocation meteorological aids brackets space weather and within the radio regulations, and this would be a subset of the existing meteorological aids service. So one that is quite familiar to us at the WMO, and that would then be a service where space weather sensors could be operating. And thinking back to the previous slide with the 3 points about determining a service, describing space weather in the radio regulations, and in terms of the sharing studies, we support work on a new WRC 27 agenda item to look at the regulatory provisions and potential sharing studies in a way that doesn't place constraints on incumbent services. So services which are already operating would be able to continue operating, but this would mean that in future, space weather sensors would need to be considered when new services are being discussed. So this is an agenda item which is, yeah, it's about creating new protections for things that we really do care about and we really use. So we're quite supportive of it and providing, you know, doing quite a lot of work on defining what sort of sensors and what specific frequency bands we would be looking at to include in this agenda item for the next conference to get those additional protections. So I'll pause and open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Kirsty.
I see Mohammed, you've raised your hand.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. Yes, thank you so much for giving me the floor. I have two questions regarding this agenda item. Just for your information, right now I'm in the Busan, Korea, taking part in the Asia Pacific Preparatory Groups, APG5, for the Asia Pacific regions for the WRC. Today, we have this agenda item, the drafting group of this agenda item, and I have two questions regarding to the context of this work. The first one was that today we have a lots of discussions about the difference between the space weather and the space weather sensor. So I would like to have a clarifications about the WMO positions regarding these two terms. So my understanding is that in Article 1, we would like to have a definition for the space weather, and then in Article 4 we want to include the space weather sensor under as a subset of the MET-H service. So this is the first question: what is the WMO positions about the definitions for these two terms? And the second question, which again was raised today during the discussion between the APT members, was about a possible candidate bands for those space weather sensors. So I'm just wondering that whether WMO has any, how can I say, thought or positions regarding to any possible new frequency ranges for those applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to answer your questions, the second question first. So in terms of possible candidate bands, the expert team on space weather is currently doing some work to identify those priority frequency bands and those candidate bands. So taking input from members and looking at which bands are used to provide which measurement capability, and try and create that priority list. This is being led by Benji Spencer, who's a member of this expert team, and will actually be speaking to this item in the session on Thursday. So I'd suggest, for more detail of how that work is progressing, that you get in touch with him. But my understanding is that he currently has a very long list and is working to try and narrow this down. I also know there's similar work ongoing within the European CPT group to look at which specific bands would be these candidate bands. I think this is going to be a point of many discussions in the run-up to the conference this year. So the WMO is currently working on our priorities for that, but we haven't got that list yet. And in terms of the WMO position on the two different definitions, I am going to ask Eric if he could come in and share any insights on that.
Yeah, no problem, Kirsty. Regarding just maybe to add some information regarding the frequency band, the approach taken was first to take into account the frequency band for system in use in order to ensure their protection in the future. So in fact, we decided to try to list the different frequency band for system in use or near to be used, and to exclude at this time all systems which are in a research phase. So that means that, as mentioned by Kirsty, that the frequency band can be very large range, because sometimes some system occupied a very large frequency range. So it's a very work we will have to do until WRC to regarding the potential new agenda item to try to obtain allocation for space weather. In fact, MET-H, square bracket, round bracket, space weather. Because if we ask for too much frequency range, by experience, we know that at the end we obtain nothing. So we'll have to very focused our need on a specific frequency range, and as a small number as possible. So just to provide information regarding that, but I think Benji will be able to provide us more information on that regarding the work done in WMO. Now, regarding the definition, just for information, the proposed definition put there was slightly modified some months ago. So I think that take into account the sun, because the main space weather effect is providing from the sun, but it's not an issue here. Now, the aim, the idea, and to see the difference between the space weather and space weather sensor. The space weather is really the definition of what we are observing. And the space weather sensors is the equipment which permit to make this observation. And the idea here is because in the space weather sensor, we have passive sensor, but we have also active sensor. We have some systems which are active space weather system. So it's why it's important to make the difference. Now, regarding Article 1 and Article 4, for sure, the space weather definition has to be put in Article 1, which is the article dedicated for definition in the radio regs. In the Article 4, the aim is to put here the fact that space weather will operate under METAID's parentheses space weather service. That means a subset of METAIDs. And in Article 1, the idea is just to put this subset, kind of not definition, because definition is Article 1, but subset information in Article 4. Now, regarding the definition of the space weather sensors, passive and active, the proposal at this stage is to put this definition in a dedicated WRC resolution, which is under discussion, and which appear in the draft CPM report as it's a resolution called the importance of the space weather application or something like that. Is similar, in fact, to the resolution 673, which indicates the importance of the passive observation. So like this, we will have all the different, I can say, organization of to ensure to cover completely the space weather recognition in the radio regs. And it's important to have in mind that this regarding the space weather, we are in a two-step approaches. WRC 23 will be the recognition in the radio regs. And if we obtain the recognition, and then we will be able to have further a new agenda item for WRC 27 in order to be sure that we will be able to make new allocation based on the different definition inserted in the radio regs. So it's really important to have this definition inserted at WRC 23, because without any recognition, we will not be able to have a new agenda item. So I hope that's clarified your and answer your question.
Thank you so much, Eric. I do appreciate the explanation. It's right now it's much clearer for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric.
No problem. Any other comments? See none, so we can go to the next agenda item. One topic C, and I think it's Marcus.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, this topic 9.1c is to study the use of IMT systems and technology for fixed wireless broadband systems in frequency band for the fixed service. So using mobile technology for fixed service and frequency bands that are allocated to the fixed service. This comes with the difficulty that there are many fixed service allocations throughout the spectrum, and a number of which are adjacent to frequency bands that are used by ESS and ESS passive in particular. And this comes, of course, with the problem that this changes completely the compatibility environment between the fixed service use, which then would then be extended to all sorts of mobile applications and highly density applications with a mobile element to it, in bands which were not considered for this, and this causes could cause some issues to our neighboring use of the bands by ESS passive, also covered by 5340, which is the footnote which says all emissions are prohibited. So this is something which raises significant concerns, because this is a wide open agenda item, and this could lead to all sorts of problems if this would succeed. That brings us to the WMO position, which is clearly saying that this agenda item is too broad the way it is, and that's we are concerned with all the potential effects on many meteorological operations and applications, particular ESS passive and also in bands under 5340. So this is something of general nature, which some parties try to sneak something in, which is giving them all sorts of flexibilities, and at the same time causing all sorts of problems to others, including us. So that's why this is not so much appreciated. There are certain parts of the world, for example, Europe, which is fully against this, and others as well. So I hope this does not succeed in this general nature. But what we can also expect is that if nothing comes out of 9.1 topic C, that we will see proposals for agenda item 10 for the WRC 27 agenda, which is dealing with certain elements of this. With this, back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Marcus. Kind of topics that we are always to keep awake, I could say, because it can have a very rich impact on our systems. Any comments? None, so we can go to next agenda item, 9.1 topic D. Bruno?
Yes, thank you, Eric. 9.1D, which is it deals with the protection of ESS passive in the frequency band 36-37 gigahertz from non-GSO FSS space station. In fact, that's a kind of consequential topic which came from a discussion which were not fully resolved at the previous conference, WRC 19, under agenda item 1.6, where agenda item 1.6 was dealing with developing a regulatory framework for the deployment of non-GSO FSS in certain frequency band, including the band 30.7.5, 38 gigahertz. And one of the unresolved issues was whether FSS space stations can cause interference to ESS passive in the nearby band 36 to 37 gigahertz. So basically, the outcome of WRC 19 was to call for additional ITOR studies, which would address two issues. One, which is the interference from non-GSO FSS constellations into the sensing channel of the ESS passive, what we are currently normally considering. And the second issue, which is also to look at the cold calibration channel of ESS passive, which is something that we don't necessarily always consider, but which is quite important in order to have proper calibration and a proper validity of our measurements. And here there are some geometrical considerations depending upon the relative altitude of the ESS passive sensors, ESS satellite, and the FSS satellites which come into play. So for WMO, what is quite important is to ensure the protection of the ESS passive in the bands, and where this band is quite critical for the measurement of number of parameters, including rain rate, snow and sea ice morphology, lake ice, snow water content, etc. So quite key to look at that. And in fact, studies have been initiated during the previous cycle and its continuation. So if you look at the next slide, where we are, so as WMO, of course, our interest is to support the protection for both the cold sky calibration and also the sensing channel. And as a result, WMO also support the to have a proper implementation in the radio regulation of the conditions which will be identified by the result of studies. And in fact, there are two parts. One is technical, one is regulatory. On the technical side, I would say that good progress has been done in the studies. And in fact, there is a kind of convergence that an unwanted emission power density limit of -31 dBW per 100 megahertz would address the protection of the ESS calibration channel, in particular from FSS space stations, which would operate at a higher altitude than ESS passive. When it comes to protection of ESS sensing channel from lower altitude FSS, in fact, what came out from recent studies is that normally these FSS satellites use some kind of body blockage, and if we take into account the loss coming from this satellite body, there will be no real issue, no real interference, so no unwanted emission limit is required. So that's basically where we are in terms of studies. Certain convergence is achieved. Now the problem is what to do with that, what to do with this outcome, and whether the radio regulations can be modified or not. And here there are still diverging views, with some administrations, in particular one, which believe that since we are under agenda item 9.1, which is a report of the ITU BR director reflecting the studies, it shouldn't give a hint for modification of the radio regulation. That's some views, but it's not shared. And in fact, there are many administrations, in particular in Europe, for example, which believe that under 9.1, if there is a need, we can modify the radio regulations. And in particular, so in Europe, there has been some good progress. And currently there is a proposal for a new footnote in the radio regulation, which would provide the unwanted emission power density limit, which comes from the studies. So that's what I displayed in the slides here that you can see. That's what Europe is preparing, and I suspect that other regions may go in the same direction. So that's it for this agenda item. Technically speaking, I think it's more or less solved. The regulatory aspect is still to be fully addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Yes, regarding agenda item 9.1, we have the same kind of discussion regarding 9.1a of the possibility to modify the radio regs under this specific agenda item, and coming from the same administration. So no more comments. Is there other comments? This agenda item 9.1 topic D. I see none, so we'll go to the last agenda item regarding this chapter. So agenda item 9, Article 21. So this agenda item, in fact, appears at the last, very last plenary of WRC 19, in which the identification and new allocation for mobile appears in the 26 gigahertz band. And in fact, some administration makes the link between the, as this 26 gigahertz band are specified in Article 21.5, which mention maximum power limits for station in the mobile and fixed services that needs to be respected. So, so it's why there is not a dedicated agenda item except agenda item 9, Article 21, because this make reference to the document mentioned here, document 550, which invite ITU to study the applicability of such limits in Article 21.5 if these limits are always appropriate to ensure the protection of satellite system, knowing that this new service, mobile service in the 26 gigahertz band will use the array of active elements. So regarding this specific frequency band, WMO concern is related to the protection of ESS from space to Earth allocation in the 25.5 to 27 gigahertz. And it's why in the WMO position, WMO supports the approach, first of all, to ensure that no impact will occur in the band 25.5 to 27 gigahertz regarding the future deployment of IMT system using this specific array of active elements. WMO also support regarding the notification that a temporary approach be developed in order, it's like if an administration want to notify a specific base station, to have a kind of flag on this specific notification, and in order to ensure that the verification of this IMT station will not have any impact regarding the satellite system, and until so this temporary approach will go until WRC will take a decision on how to treat this array of active elements in order to ensure that the maximum power limit mentioned in Article 21.5 is always correct. So just to provide you information regarding the discussion around this agenda item, first of all, there are a lot of discussion in order to not to limit the study of around the 26 gigahertz band, because array of active elements can be used in other frequency band, which share with different satellite services. So it's one element. And the other element, it's regarding what need to be taken into account. Today, the Article 21.5 is related to a maximum EIRP, and it appears that to take into account the total radiated power will be more appropriate. So there are a lot of discussion around this. So at this stage, the approach is to prepare a note to the director of the Bureau of Radio Communication to ask him to take into account this temporary approach and to take into account the total radiated power. But this note is not yet completely finalized and approved. But in any case, it's certainly something that will not be solved during WRC 23, and certainly a new agenda item or whatever will be proposed during WRC 23 to be dealt with WRC 27. So that's it for this agenda item 9, Article 21. If there is any question. None, so we can go to the last agenda item, item 10. So Marcus, you will be the last presenter.
Thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, agenda item 10 deals with the establishment of the preliminary agenda of the WRC 27. No, actually, the WRC 19 already developed the preliminary agenda at the for the 27 conference, and the agenda item 10 at the WRC 23 will confirm the agenda and will also set up a preliminary agenda for the next but one conference. So the preliminary agenda, which you will then see on the next slide, has a number of items that are of interest to WMO, of course. And also the regional groups deal with this preliminary agenda and see whether they are still supporting those or not, or whether they shall propose new items, or whether they shall propose modifications to these existing preliminary agenda items. Also, WMO has set up in his preliminary position paper one possible item for the 27 conference, which I will show you in a bit. So when you look at those, and I highlighted some text in red, which shows you the potential impact or on the on issues related to WMO interests. For the first item, when you look at it, this is dealing with imaging systems for security purposes in the framework of the radio location service, but it's dealing with frequency ranges, which are also very much of interest for passive sensing above 275 gigahertz and also above 231 gigahertz. This may even overlap with the interests that we have under agenda item 1.14 at this conference. So there we have to have an eye on that whether those this agenda item 2.1 will not cause any conflicts with our interests. Then the second item is another satellite service issue dealing with aeronautical and maritime eSIMs. And there they are usually in frequency bands also neighboring to ESS passive, and that requires to look into the adjacent band compatibility. In the middle of it, you see the first light orange boxes when you look at agenda item 2.5, which is dealing with the 70-80 gigahertz range. There we look into the protection of ES passive in these ranges, and WMO is considering whether this could be extended to frequency bands in general above 86 gigahertz to regulate the unwanted emissions of active services in neighboring bands. To do this now would be better than later, because now not so many active services are using those bands above 86 gigahertz, but making some kind of regulations now would have less impact on the development of those systems than doing these retrospectively. We saw that at WRC 19, where we had these huge difficulties around 24 gigahertz. Then 2.6, that's what was explained, that this is the second leg of the space weather agenda item. So we are hoping to have some recognition under the current agenda item 9.1 topic A, and having the finalization of the space weather issue with the second agenda item. And then finally, when you look at the bottom box, 2.13, this mobile service for narrowband mobile satellite system in the area 1.5 to 5 gigahertz. You heard from Philip that 1.18 most probably comes to no change. Here from the WMO perspective, we should have an eye on this issue, because the band 1675, 1710 should not be again considered under this agenda item for a narrowband MSS, because this is of high interest and importance for the distribution of meteorological satellite data. So that's basically where we are. This thing is pretty much in flow because all the regional groups take these decisions on what are the proposals for agenda items for 27 as their last items. So we cannot populate this here with some more concrete additional new proposals. You might see some issues like 6G in frequency band very high, or you see these MSS applications trying it again after the failure of agenda item 1.18. So these are things that one can expect. But currently we have to live with what all turns around these preliminary agenda items under this agenda item 10 that we have on this table here. With this, Eric, I think that's draws this to a close. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marcus, for this presentation. As you said, in fact, all these agenda items, future agenda items, will be discussed during WRC and finalized during WRC, and in particular, the last week of WRC. You can say in December 2023. Okay, so any comments regarding this at this stage draft proposed preliminary agenda item for next WRC 27? I see none, so I think that's conclude all the presentation. So I think we are quite efficient. 5 minutes. To be frank, I was afraid that we will go for a more longer time, but it's fine. So first of all, I want to thank all the presenter and the preparation of the presentation. For some of them in cooperation with between different people. So it's always good to have this spirit in the preparation of a workshop. So very many thanks for that. And I want also to thank WMO Secretariat and in particular Zoya for her reactive action. I could say at any time of the day, even very late. So many thanks Zoya to put in place all this presentation and ensure to have all of it in the right order and the right things. So it was very comfortable and very appreciated. And finally, I will thank also to all the participants. It's always good to see that the interest of such a workshop, and it's very important to ensure that the WMO position are well understood, as we mentioned, to be sure that the right information could be provided and defended in a national level, and in particular with your national regulatory authority. So it's very important because, as you all know, in ITU and during WRC, WMO it's an observer. So we can only obtain results if we have support of administration. So thanks again for people who are participating. Thanks for your action on a national level and the regional level for some of you who are participating in regional preparation. And if there is no other comments or remarks, I will propose to close this session. Zoya, it is agreeable for you?
Thank you very much. We also wanted to thank all the presenters, members of expert team radio frequency coordination, and we also wanted to thank all the participants of this meeting. So we hope it's a good start and we could plan something similar in the future, even for face-to-face. Well, we do have some such plans for 2024, so we really hope that this will happen. So thank you again for everyone, for radio frequency expert team members, and not only for this workshop, but for presenting WMO position at the regional meetings, fighting for this position at WRC meeting conference. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's really appreciated. And of course, thank you to Eric as a chair of ETRFC expert team radio frequency. So thank you very much. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Zoya. And just a last point, if of course people need to have more information in a few days or later, feel free to send an email to Zoya or to ETRFC members, and we will be pleased to answer. So thank you once again, and see you in 2 days for the presenter, and enjoy, have a good day, and the session is closed.
Thank you, Eric. Have a good day.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Eric.
all.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye to everybody.
Goodbye.